8 years ago, Nora Ashcroft buried the only man she ever loved on the very night she learned she was pregnant with his child. Damien Vale vanished without a trace after an assassination, and the underworld believed him dead. Nora raised Lila alone, penniless, without support, and with no one knowing the child's father. Then, one ordinary afternoon, the doors of a luxury hotel slid open, and Damien walked in, alive, cold, untouchable. He stared directly into Nora's eyes, but failed to see the child sitting and drawing just steps away. If you enjoy stories of secrets, betrayal, and love that transcends the shadows, please like and comment the city you're currently viewing so I know how far my story has progressed. And don't go anywhere, because what happens next will change everything. The lobby of the Harrington Grand smelled like cold money and fresh-cut lilies, and Nora Ashcroft had learned, over 3 years of working events in this building, to stop noticing either. She moved through the space the way she always did, clipboard tucked under one arm, earpiece in, eyes scanning the room for anything that wasn't where it was supposed to be. A centerpiece tilted 2 inches to the left. A server standing too close to the bar, arms crossed, daydreaming. The microphone stand by the east podium that someone had adjusted without telling her. She fixed all 3 without breaking stride. The Harrington's grand lobby stretched wide and high, all marble and chrome and glass that caught afternoon light and scattered it in directions that never quite made sense. Today it was dressed for the Meridian Capital Summit, a closed-door investor meeting that had required 6 weeks of prep, 4 meetings with hotel security, and 1 very unpleasant phone call with a Swiss liaison who kept mispronouncing her name. Nora had handled it the way she handled everything, quietly, efficiently, without once letting anyone see how much effort it actually cost her. She was good at that, making things look effortless. She'd had years of practice. Lila. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The little girl sitting cross-legged beneath the far window, dark hair loose, tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration, looked up immediately. "I'm almost done." "You said that 20 minutes ago." "I'm still almost done." Lila held up the drawing without turning it around. A skyline. Harbor City's skyline, rendered in crayon with startling accuracy for a 7-year-old. The bridge was a little lopsided. The water was the wrong color. The rest of it was remarkably good. "I'm doing the reflection." Nora let out a breath and turned back to her clipboard. Lila wasn't supposed to be here. The school had called at noon, fever going through the second-grade classroom, half the kids sent home. Could Mrs. Ashcroft please come pick up Lila? Nora wasn't Mrs. anything, but she'd stopped correcting that a long time ago. She'd picked Lila up, driven back to the hotel because the Meridian setup wasn't finished, and settled her daughter in the one corner of the lobby that was out of the way of catering carts and decorators and the general organized chaos of a summit prep. It wasn't ideal, it was what existed. The earpiece crackled. "Nora, VIP convoy just cleared the security checkpoint. ETA 8 minutes. Copy." She pulled the clipboard up and started walking the room again, doing the final pass she'd already done twice. Table placements, badge station, the quiet bar set up along the north wall for the informal pre-session. Everything was where it should be. She'd made sure of that. She always made sure of that. She did not think about who was in the convoy. She'd known for 3 days. 3 days since Marcus in hotel management had flagged the guest list, and she'd seen the name and felt the floor do something strange beneath her feet. She'd stood in the back office with the paper in her hand for a long time. Then she'd folded it, set it down, and gone back to work. That was all there was to do. The lobby doors opened at 4:47 p.m. She was standing near the badge station when it happened, close enough to see clearly, far enough that she might have been invisible if she wanted to be. She didn't look up right away. She was writing something down, something she immediately forgot. The security team came in first, 4 of them, dark suits, the kind of stillness in their bodies that only came from years of very specific training. They swept the room the way she swept rooms, looking for everything wrong. One of them clocked her. She held his gaze for 2 seconds, then looked back at her clipboard, because she belonged here, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Then Damien walked through the door. 8 years had done something to him that she didn't have a word for. It wasn't just age. He'd always been built like something designed for conflict. Broad shoulders, a stillness in his posture that was never quite rest, eyes that evaluated everything in the room within seconds of entering it. All of that was still there, sharpened rather than softened. But something else had been added, a weight, a coldness in the set of his jaw that hadn't existed before, like whatever warmth he'd once carried had been deliberately excised, and the scar tissue left behind had hardened into something else entirely. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie. He was on the phone. His voice didn't carry across the lobby, but she could see his mouth moving, and she could see, even from here, that whatever he was saying wasn't a conversation. It was a directive. Nora made herself breathe. She had prepared for this moment. She had talked herself through it in the shower, in the car, at 3 a.m. on Tuesday when she'd woken up with her heart going too fast. She told herself it was 8 years. She told herself she was a different person. She told herself it would mean nothing. She had not prepared for the physical reality of him, which was, apparently, a different matter entirely from whatever she'd constructed in her head. He finished the call. His eyes swept the room, not the way a guest sweeps a room, but the way a man who has survived by being smarter and faster than everyone in any given space sweeps a room. She watched the sweep happen, watched it reach the badge station, watched it reach her. For 1 second, maybe 2, he looked at her. Nothing crossed his face. He looked away. Nora's pen scratched something on the clipboard. She wasn't sure what. Her hand was moving on its own, performing the pantomime of productivity, while her chest did something she refused to examine. He didn't recognize her. She didn't know which was worse, that she'd braced for the recognition, or that its absence landed like something physical. She turned and walked toward the east corridor because she needed somewhere that wasn't here, even for 90 seconds. She had 90 seconds before she needed to hand off the badge packets to the registration team. She used them to stand in the corridor with her back against the wall and her eyes fixed on the ceiling and her breathing deliberate and measured and slow. 8 years. He'd been alive for 8 years. She pressed her palm flat against the clipboard and felt the edge of it bite into her hand and focused on that instead. What? Marcus from hotel management found her 6 minutes later. He was a compact, efficient man in his mid-40s who'd worked at the Harrington for 12 years and had learned, somewhere in the last 3 of them, to read Nora's face accurately enough to know when to ask questions and when not to. Today, he did not ask questions. "Registration is ready," he said. "We're about 4 minutes behind. We'll make it up during the cocktail portion." She pushed off the wall. "Did the South Conference Room get the updated seating chart?" "Sent it an hour ago." "Good." She walked. He walked alongside her. The dietary restrictions for the Callaway Group. Kitchen confirmed twice. And the AV tested at 2 and at 3. She nodded. They walked back into the lobby, and she did not look toward the north side of the room where she could already feel, without looking, that he was still standing. She had developed, apparently, some useless additional sense in the last 10 minutes that knew exactly where Damien Vale was in any given space. She hated it. She focused on the badge station, the name tags in their crisp sleeves, the welcome packets with the agenda inside, the registration assistant who was new and nervous and whose hands shook slightly when she arranged things. Nora stood next to her for 2 minutes and directed her through it without once raising her voice, and by the end of it the girl was steadier and the station looked perfect. Then she heard Lila. Not words, just the particular quality of her daughter's silence changing, the shift from absorbed concentration to something else. She knew that shift the way she knew her own name. She turned. Lila had put down her crayons. She was sitting up straighter, and she was looking at something across the lobby with the expression she made when something confused her, and she was deciding whether to ask about it or just figure it out herself. It was an expression that had belonged to exactly one other person Nora had ever known, and the resemblance hit her every single time with the force of something she could never quite prepare for. Lila was looking at Damien. He was 20 feet away, deep in conversation with 2 men in suits, and he hadn't noticed. Why would he notice a 7-year-old with crayons? Why would he notice anything except the negotiation in front of him? But Lila was looking. Nora moved. Not quickly. Quickly would attract attention. She crossed the lobby at the pace of someone with a destination and a purpose, which she was, and she had. She reached Lila's corner and crouched down beside her daughter, angling her body to block the sight line. Time to pack up, she said quietly. Lila didn't look away immediately. Who's that? Someone for the summit, a guest. She began gathering crayons from the carpet. Put your drawing in your bag. He keeps looking over here. Nora's hand stilled. She did not turn around. He's probably looking at the bar, she said. The setup is unusual. Pack your things, baby. Lila, with the particular stubbornness that had characterized her since approximately 18 months of age, turned to look one more time before reaching for her drawing. Nora finally allowed herself to glance over her shoulder just quickly, just enough to check. Damien was not looking at the bar. His conversation had paused. One of the suited men was speaking, but Damien's attention had drifted just slightly, just a fraction, in the direction of the window corner. Not to Lila specifically. To the corner. Like something in his peripheral vision had snagged on something and he didn't know what yet. Nora stood up. She took Lila's bag from the floor and held her daughter's hand and walked toward the elevator bank at a pace that was measured and even and gave nothing away. I wanted to finish the reflection, Lila said. You can finish it at home. The light's different at home. The light at home is fine. Lila let herself be steered. She was a practical child, ultimately. She picked her battles. She leaned against her mother's side as they waited for the elevator, her head coming up to just below Nora's ribs, and she looked up with her father's dark eyes and said, You're walking fast. I'm always walking fast. You're walking faster than usual fast. The elevator arrived. Nora guided her daughter inside, pressed the button for the third-floor offices, and watched the lobby doors close. In the last second before they shut, she saw Damien turn fully around and look directly at the place where they'd been standing. She got through the rest of the afternoon the way she'd gotten through the last 8 years. One task at a time. 1 hour at a time. The summit guests were seated. The welcome remarks happened on schedule. The catering moved smoothly and the AV didn't fail, and the quiet crisis with the Callaway Group's seating, 2 of them apparently hadn't spoken in 14 months following a business dispute, was resolved by Marcus with the kind of quiet diplomatic competence that made her grateful she'd fought to keep him on her team. Lila spent 2 hours in the third-floor conference room with her drawing and a sandwich, checking in by text with the particular dignity of a 7-year-old who owned a phone primarily for this purpose. Nora did not go back to the lobby level unless she had to. She had to, twice. The first time he was in the conference room, safe. The second time he was at the bar. She was crossing the lobby floor when she heard his voice for the first time, fully, not muffled by distance. And it stopped her in a way that was involuntary and humiliating and exactly the kind of thing she'd told herself wouldn't happen. He was ordering something. Whiskey, by the sound of it. And then he paused, and in that pause his head turned, and this time when his eyes landed on her there was something different in them. Something that hadn't been there at 4:47. Recognition was the wrong word. It wasn't recognition, it was something that came before recognition. A disturbance, like a stone dropped in water too dark to see into, the ripples reaching the surface before you understood their source. She made herself walk. She had made it 4 steps when she heard him say behind her, "Excuse me." She stopped, because she'd told herself she was prepared, and now she was going to have to find out whether that was true. She turned around. Up close, 8 years were more visible. A thin scar along his jaw she didn't recognize. That was new, from after. Lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there before. His posture was the same. His eyes were darker. "You're the event coordinator," he said. Not a question. "I am." "Damien Vale." He said it like it was information rather than an introduction. "I know who you are." She watched his face when she said it, watched for the thing that would tell her what he knew, what he remembered, what existed inside him that corresponded to anything that had existed between them. There was a flicker. Small. There, and then not there. "Have we met?" he said. The question landed somewhere in the center of her chest and sat there with its full weight. 8 years ago, she had loved this man enough to build a life around him. He had held her in a room in this city and told her that she was the only thing in his world he'd ever been certain of. She had believed him. She had carried his daughter alone for 9 months, and then carried her for 7 years after that. and he was asking if they had met. "No," she said. "We haven't." Something moved across his face, not conviction, doubt. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they can't quite place but can't dismiss either, the specific expression of a mind that knows it's missing something and hasn't identified what. "You're certain?" "I am." She tucked the clipboard more firmly under her arm. "Is there anything you need for the evening session, Mr. Vale? We have coffee service starting in 20 minutes. The doubt didn't leave his face, but he looked away, and she took that as the end of the conversation and turned and walked before he could find another reason to continue it. Her hands were steady. She was proud of that. Her hands were steady, and her voice had been steady, and she had looked him in the face and told a lie that was also technically true. Because the man standing at that bar was not the man she had met. Whatever had happened to him in 8 years had made him into someone her former self would not have recognized either. She took the stairs back to the 3rd floor and sat on the cold floor outside the conference room with her back against the wall and her knees pulled up and her eyes shut and let herself have 3 minutes. Just 3. She used the first minute to be furious. At the situation. At him for surviving. At herself for still caring that he had. She used the second minute to do the math she'd already done 100 times. He hadn't found her. He hadn't come looking. 8 years of silence, and the only reason she was looking at him now was because his name had ended up on a hotel booking and she hadn't walked away from the contract in time. She used the 3rd minute to think about Lila. About what Lila had seen in the lobby. About the way her daughter had looked at a stranger with her uncanny, relentless attention. The kind of attention that had always reminded Nora of. She cut the thought off. She stood up, brushed off her jacket, and went back to work. At 8:30, the summit's evening session broke for a networking reception, and Nora handed the running of it to her assistant with instructions and went to collect Lila from the 3rd floor conference room. The room was dim. Lila had pushed the chairs back and made herself a camp in the corner with the conference table's extra cloth napkins arranged into a surprisingly adequate nest. She was asleep. Nora stood in the doorway for a moment and just looked at her daughter. 7 years old, black hair spread across improvised bedding, one arm thrown out, fingers open, a crayon still loosely held in her fist. In sleep, the resemblance was even worse. Nora crossed the room quietly and crouched down and gathered her daughter without fully waking her, the practiced weight distribution of years of carrying a sleeping child through hotel corridors and parking garages and up flights of stairs in their apartment building. Lila stirred and murmured something and curled against her mother's shoulder. "Shh," Nora said. "We're going home." She carried her to the elevator, managed the button with her elbow, rode it down to the parking level. The lobby reception hummed above them, muffled by floors of concrete and steel. She had almost made it to her car when she heard the footsteps. Not running, walking, deliberate, coming from the direction of the stairwell. She turned. Damien stood at the edge of the parking level, 20 feet away, jacket gone, sleeves rolled to the elbow, holding something in his hand. He looked down at it, then up at her, then at Lila, asleep against her shoulder. In his hand was a crayon drawing of Harbor City's skyline. "She left it in the lobby," he said. His voice was different now, quieter. The boardroom composure stripped away by something she couldn't name. "I was going to leave it at the front desk." He paused. "And then I saw it." He held the drawing up slightly. In the bottom corner, in the large, careful letters of a child who had recently learned to write her own name, Lila had signed it. Not her last name, just her first. But above the signature, in the way children sometimes do without understanding the weight of what they're putting down, she had drawn 2 figures standing next to the skyline, a woman with long hair, and a man, taller, with dark crayon lines at his jaw, that Lila had labeled, in the same careful letters, Daddy. The silence in the parking structure was absolute. Damien looked at Nora, and this time there was no question in his eyes. The drawing was not large, maybe 8 inches across, the paper slightly waxy from the crayon wax that had built up in layers where Lila had gone back over the same lines twice. Harbor City's skyline in blues and grays, and one very wrong shade of green for the harbor water. 2 figures at the bottom. And the word Daddy, in letters that were almost even, almost neat, the D slightly larger than it needed to be because Lila always pressed harder at the beginning of a word than at the end. Damien was still holding it. Nora watched him look at it, watched the thing that was happening behind his eyes. The calculation shutting down, the boardroom machinery grinding to a halt, something rawer and less manageable taking its place. His jaw was set. His breathing had changed. She could see that from 20 feet away, and she hated that she could still read him that clearly, hated that 8 years hadn't taken that away from her. Lila shifted against her shoulder, still asleep. Her fingers had loosened around the crayon and it dropped to the concrete floor and rolled 2 inches and stopped. Neither of them looked at it. "How old?" Damien said. "Not how old is she, just how old. Like the grammar didn't matter, like getting the number was the only part that mattered right now." 7, Nora said. He did the math. She watched him do it, watched it land. 7. He repeated it like he was testing the weight of the word. Then, "The night before the Caruso meeting, you told me—" He stopped. His hand tightened slightly on the drawing. "You told me you had something to tell me." "Yes." "I never came back." "No, you didn't." The fluorescent lights in the parking structure were the unflattering kind, cold, slightly flickering, the kind that make everyone look like they haven't slept in a week. Damien looked like he hadn't slept in considerably longer than that. The scar along his jaw was more visible in this light. She found herself cataloging damage without meaning to. The way he held his left shoulder slightly lower than his right, probably an old injury never properly healed. The particular quality of stillness he had now, that was nothing like the stillness she remembered. The old stillness had been a kind of readiness. This one was something else, something that had been constructed deliberately, over years, to keep things out. "I need you to come upstairs," he said. "I need to take my daughter home." "Nora." It was the first time he'd used her name. She hadn't given it to him, which meant he'd known it before he came down here, had known it before he held up the drawing, and the realization of that he'd had time to prepare, that she hadn't, shifted something in the conversation. "You looked me up," she said. "I looked up the event coordinator when I saw the name on the summit documents." His voice was careful now, controlled. The emotion hadn't disappeared. It had been moved somewhere else, the way he moved everything that was inconvenient. "I recognized the name. I wasn't certain why." "But you didn't say anything." "In the lobby." "I wasn't certain." "And now you are." He looked at the drawing, then at Lila's sleeping face against her shoulder, then at Nora, and something in his expression fractured, just slightly, just at the edges, the way stone fractures before it breaks, the crack appearing long before the collapse. "Come upstairs," he said. "Please." The please cost him something. She could tell. She thought about saying no. She had the right to say no. She had earned the right to say no, approximately 730 mornings of getting up alone and making breakfast alone and explaining to a little girl, in terms that shifted as Lila got older and the questions got harder, why there was no one else in their family. She had earned 1,000 no's. Lila made a small sound against her shoulder. Not distress, just sleep noise. The comfortable, boneless sleep of a child who trusted the person carrying her. "There's a sitting room off the south elevator bank," Nora said. "Private." "Fine." She turned toward the elevator. He fell into step behind her, not beside her, and she was grateful for that. She didn't want to walk next to him, didn't want to negotiate the physical geometry of it, how much space to leave or not leave. Behind was easier. Behind she didn't have to see his face. Yeah. The sitting room was small and tasteful and mostly used by hotel guests who needed to make phone calls away from the lobby. At 9 p.m. on a summit evening, it was empty. Nora settled Lila on the small sofa, arranged her jacket over her daughter's shoulders, and set the crayon drawing on the cushion beside her like it was evidence she wasn't ready to let out of her sight. Then she straightened up and turned around. Damien had shut the door. He was standing in front of it with his arms at his sides and the drawing no longer in his hands. She saw it on the side table by the door, where he'd set it without her noticing. He was looking at Lila. The expression on his face was something she had no name for. She wasn't sure there was one. "When she was born," Nora said, because she was not going to let him control the pace of this, "I tried to find you. I tried for 4 months. Every number I had was disconnected. Every contact I'd met through you had either disappeared or stopped returning calls. She kept her voice low so as not to wake Lila. Low didn't mean soft. I found out through a news article that there had been a hit on the Vale family's operation. 3 bodies. One of them was described as the heir. She paused. I believed it. The hit was staged, he said, to protect. I know why hits get staged, she said. I lived adjacent to your world long enough to know the mechanics of it. What I'm telling you is what the information looked like from where I was standing, which was alone and pregnant and 26 years old. A muscle in his jaw moved. I didn't know about the baby, he said. No, you didn't, because you were dead, or so I was informed, and dead men don't get told things. Nora, I'm not finished. She was surprised by how steady she sounded. She'd imagined this conversation before. Not often, she'd worked hard to stop imagining it, but it had happened in weak moments, in the particular cruelty of 4 a.m. when Lila was sick and there was no one else. She'd imagined it going a lot of different ways. She hadn't imagined this version, where she was standing in a hotel sitting room with her daughter asleep 3 feet away and her voice was actually steady. For 7 years, it has been me and Lila. That's it. I moved across the city. I changed careers. I built something. She has a good life, a real life. She looked at him directly. I need you to understand that before we talk about anything else. She is not a gap in your story that needs filling in. She is a full person who has existed continuously for 7 years without you. The silence stretched. I understand that, he said. His voice had gone rough. Not the calculated roughness of authority. Something genuinely disrupted. Do you? I do. He moved away from the door, not toward her, sideways, to the chair across from the sofa, where he sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped and his eyes on the floor for a moment before he looked up. I've spent 8 years building something I thought I had to build alone because everything I loved was either dead or too dangerous to be near, and now I'm sitting in a hotel room looking at my daughter's face, and... He stopped, his hands tightened briefly against each other. I don't have a speech. I don't have an explanation that covers it. I just... Another stop. I want to know her. That's not a conversation for tonight, Nora said. When then? When I've had more than 8 minutes to process the fact that you're alive. She sat down on the opposite end of the sofa from Lila, the controlled collapse of someone who has been on their feet for 14 hours and is now paying the debt. And when I've decided whether what you want is something I'm willing to make space for, you'd keep her from me. I'd protect her. She met his eyes. Which is something I've been doing since before she was born, without any help from you. So I think I've demonstrated I know how. His mouth tightened. Not anger. Something that was trying to be anger, because anger was easier than the alternative. She recognized the mechanism. She'd used it herself. I'm not the enemy, he said. I don't know what you are, she said. I knew who you were 8 years ago. The man sitting in that chair is not the same person, which means I don't actually know you, which means you don't get to tell me you're not a threat. You have to show me. He was quiet for a long time. Lila made a sound in her sleep and turned over, pulling the jacket tighter around herself without waking. Both of them went still until her breathing settled again. The moment was, in its own awful way, almost domestic. 2 people watching a child sleep, doing the instinctive wordless thing that parents do. She looks like you, Nora said before she could stop herself. Mostly, but the eyes are yours, and the way she goes still when something interests her. She paused. I've been looking at your expressions on her face for 7 years. Damien's eyes didn't move from Lila. What does she know? He said. That her father couldn't be with us. That it wasn't because of something wrong with her. A beat. I was careful about that. Thank you, said quietly, meaning it. Don't. She shook her head. I didn't do it for you. I did it because she deserved to know she was wanted, even by someone who wasn't there. He absorbed that, nodded once. She studied his profile, the scar, the new tension in everything. What happened to you? She said. After the hit. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, Vincent pulled me out. My father's consigliere. He got me out of the city before the bodies were identified, and I woke up in a safe house in Gdansk with 3 broken ribs and a cover story. His voice was flat, reciting facts. He told me the hit had been aimed at you, that if I resurfaced, whoever ordered it would finish the job and you'd be the target. He told me you'd already been moved, protected. A pause. I believed him. For a long time I believed him. Nora went very still. And then, she said, and then I started finding gaps in the story. Small ones at first, things that didn't line up. He looked at her. I've been pulling that thread for about 2 years. I'm still pulling it. His jaw set. I don't think the hit was aimed at you. I think it was aimed at me, and I think Vincent ordered it. The air in the room changed. Why? She said. Because I was 24, and my father was sick, and I was making decisions that cut into margins Vincent had been counting on for 15 years. He said it without heat, which was somehow worse. He needed me out. Dead was cleanest. When that didn't work, disappeared was good enough. Nora looked at her hands. At the clipboard she'd set on the floor, the pen still clipped to the top. Ordinary objects. Things that belonged to the ordinary life she had rebuilt in the gap he'd left. Vincent Moretti, she said. Yes. He's still in the organization. He runs it. A beat. He's been running it in my name for 8 years. The sitting room was warm, but she felt cold. Not the fear kind of cold. The kind that came from understanding something large and structural. The kind that preceded knowing how bad things actually were. He doesn't know you're back, she said. The summit was quiet. I've kept the return quiet. Something crossed his face. But if anyone in the city recognized me today and made a call, that window is closing. He paused. Nora, if Vincent finds out about Lila, stop. Her voice came out sharp enough that Lila stirred again. Nora pressed a hand lightly to her daughter's back, waited. Then, lower. I need you to not finish that sentence. I need you to hear it. I know what it means. She looked at him and felt something she hadn't felt in years. The particular terror of a threat that was real and specific and not something she could manage with a clipboard and a contingency plan. I know exactly what it means. Damien leaned forward. His voice dropped to nearly nothing. She is the only heir. If Vincent wants to keep control of the organization long term, an Ashcroft Vale daughter alive and in this city is a liability, Nora said. Yes, I worked that out. Her chest hurt. She pushed past it. How much time? I don't know. Maybe none. Maybe weeks. He paused. I need to move you both. Tonight would be... Absolutely not. Nora, I am not pulling my daughter out of her bed and disappearing her based on maybe none, maybe weeks. She kept her voice low but put everything she had into it. I've spent 7 years making sure her life felt stable. I will not blow that up on a maybe. And if it's not a maybe, then I need more than 15 minutes of conversation with a man I haven't seen in 8 years before I hand him control of my daughter's safety. She stood up. I need time. I'm not sure time is... I need time, she said again. 24 hours. Don't contact me at the hotel. I'll give you a number in the morning. He looked at her. The calculation happening behind his eyes was visible, and she didn't care. Let him calculate. She had done nothing but calculate for years, weighing every decision against Lila's well-being, and she was not going to stop now because the one person who could dismantle everything had walked back into her life through a luxury hotel lobby. Okay, he said finally. Don't follow me home. His expression tightened. I'm not going to... I don't know what you're going to do, she said. That's the problem. She picked up the clipboard, shook her daughter's shoulder gently. Lila, time to go. Lila surfaced from sleep with the immediate, slightly indignant alertness she always had. She pushed herself upright and looked around the room and then, with the devastating directness of children, looked straight at Damien. Neither of them moved. Lila stared at him for a long moment. He looked back at her with an expression that Nora could not watch directly. I know you, Lila said. Not certain. Working it out. You're from the lobby. Yes, Damien said. You found my drawing. She looked at her mother. You said it was at the front desk. We met on the way, Nora said. Lila looked back at Damien, studying him with that particular stillness that was his and no one else's. It was supposed to be a surprise, she said. The picture. I was going to give it to Mom for the wall. It's a good picture, Damien said. His voice was careful, held very deliberately level. The watercolor is wrong. Lila looked at it critically. I didn't have the right blue. A pause. Do you live in Harbor City? I'm going to be here for a while, he said. Lila nodded as though this were satisfactory information. She slid off the sofa and picked up the drawing in her bag and came to stand beside her mother, and Nora put a hand on her shoulder and moved her toward the door, not looking at Damien. Good night, Mr. Vale, Nora said. Good night, he said. She opened the door. They walked through it. She kept her hand on Lila's shoulder all the way to the elevator, all the way down to the parking level, all the way to the car, and she did not cry. She had a strict policy about not crying in the car when Lila was awake, a policy she had maintained without fail since Lila was old enough to notice. She got in. She buckled. She started the engine. Mom? Lila said. Yeah, baby. That man had the same eyes as me. Nora's hands were on the wheel. She looked at the garage wall in front of her for a moment, at the concrete pillar and the faded yellow parking line at its base. Get some sleep, she said. We'll talk tomorrow. She pulled out of the space. She drove. Behind her, Lila was quiet, in the particular way she got quiet when she was turning something over in her mind rather than letting it go. She didn't sleep. She lay in her bed in their apartment with the city hum coming through the window and Lila's breathing audible through the open door between their rooms, and she stared at the ceiling and went through it. Every angle, every implication, Vincent Moretti. She knew the name. She'd heard it exactly twice, 8 years ago, in conversations she hadn't been fully included in. The architecture of Damien's world surfacing briefly before submerging again. A name attached to efficiency and loyalty and the kind of institutional trust that powerful men extended to the men who had served their fathers before them. A name attached to a man who, according to what Damien had just told her, might have destroyed both their lives to protect a power structure. She turned onto her side and looked at the wall. She had something Damien didn't know about, had been carrying it for 3 years, thinking it was nothing, thinking she'd misunderstood what she was looking at. A file, encrypted. On a drive she kept in a lockbox in her closet under a stack of Lila's old winter clothes. She'd found it during a job. A corporate event for a financial group that turned out to be substantially more complicated than its billing suggested. Documents had passed through her possession briefly in a confused, chaotic moment of wrong deliveries and mix-ups, and she'd seen enough to know they didn't belong to anyone she wanted to hand them back to. She'd held on to them because she didn't know what else to do. She knew, looking at the wall in the dark, that she might now know exactly what to do with them. She also knew that the moment she made that decision, the ordinary life she'd built was going to become something else. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. Unknown number. A single text. There's a car parked on your street that wasn't there yesterday. Dark blue. License plate is registered to a shell company that traces to a property in Gdansk. A second text immediately after. I'm not going to apologize for checking on you. I know you told me not to. She stared at the screen. A third text. Nora. They already know. She sat up in bed. Her heart was doing something methodical and loud. She moved to the window without turning on the light and looked down at the street, at the amber wash of the streetlights on the wet pavement. Dark blue car. 4 doors. Sitting 60 feet from her building's entrance, engine off, the faint suggestion of someone in the driver's seat visible from 2 stories up if you were looking for it. She hadn't been looking for it. She turned from the window and went to Lila's room. Her daughter was asleep in a tangle of blankets, the city's light coming through the curtain and resting on her face, and Nora stood in the doorway and felt the particular terror of a threat that had already arrived, Nora was still standing in Lila's doorway when her phone buzzed again. Not a text this time, a call. Same unknown number. She answered before the second vibration finished. There are 2 of them in the car, Damien said. His voice was different from the sitting room. Compressed. Operational. A third one went around back 40 minutes ago. I've been watching since I left the hotel. You've been outside my building for 40 minutes. Yes. She should have been angry about that. She filed it somewhere to be angry about later. Lila's asleep. I know. Don't wake her yet. I need 3 minutes to move the car around back before you come down. If they see you come out the front with her, they'll call it in before we reach the corner. Where are we going? Somewhere I control. A pause. I have a building on the north side, residential front, secured underneath. I've used it before when you needed to disappear people. A beat. When I needed to keep people safe. Same infrastructure. Yes, he said, not apologetically, just honestly. Same infrastructure. She looked at Lila's face in the city light and made the decision in the space of one breath because there was only one decision available, and she'd known that the moment she looked out the window at the blue car. 3 minutes, she said. 2.5 now. She hung up and went to the closet. The lockbox was at the bottom, under Lila's old snowsuits. She had the combination in her head. She'd never written it down. Inside, the drive. A copy of Lila's birth certificate. $400 in cash she'd been adding to since Lila was 2 years old because some part of her had always known, in the low, unexamined way you know things you'd rather not, that the ordinary life she'd built had a fault line running through it. She put the drive in her jacket pocket. She took the cash and the documents. She went to Lila's room and sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand on her daughter's shoulder and said quietly, "Hey, we need to go on a trip." Lila opened her eyes. Not confused, her daughter woke fast and clear, another thing she'd gotten from a man she'd never met. Now? Right now, I need you to put on your shoes. Lila sat up and looked at her mother's face for 2 seconds with those dark, precise eyes, and then reached for her shoes without asking anything else. 7 years old, and she could read a room. Nora felt the familiar tidal grief of that her daughter had learned not to ask questions in certain tones of voice, that she'd learned it from necessity. "Bring your drawing," Nora said. "The harbor one?" "Whichever one matters to you." Lila thought about it with genuine seriousness and selected 3 from her bag. They went down the back stairs. Damien's car was a black SUV with plates she didn't recognize. He was behind the wheel. Another man sat in the front passenger seat, older, heavy through the shoulders, a face like weathered concrete. He didn't introduce himself, and Nora didn't ask. She got in the back with Lila. The car moved before the door was fully shut. "The ones out front?" she said. "Still in position. They didn't see you go out the back." He turned north without using the main boulevard. "We have maybe an hour before they realize the apartment is empty." "Then what?" "Then they call Vincent." He checked the mirror. Not at her. At the street behind them. At the cross traffic. At whatever geometry of threat he was calculating. And Vincent makes a decision about how visible he wants to be. Lila was sitting with her drawings on her lap, looking out the window at the night city going past. She wasn't performing calm. She was actually calm, in the way children were sometimes calm in crisis because they trusted the person beside them. And Nora felt that trust like a weight she had to carry carefully. "Who are they?" Nora asked, low, not for Lila. "Victor Crane's people," Damien said. "He runs security contracts for Vincent's legitimate fronts, former federal, smart." A pause. "He's also the man who drove me to the safe house in Gdansk 8 years ago." "So he's known you were alive?" "The whole time." The car turned again. The city thinned out. The north side of Harbor City was older, warehouse districts transitioning into converted loft buildings, the kind of urban geography that existed in the ambiguous space between what a neighborhood used to be and what it was still becoming. "Damien," she said, "I know. You don't know what I was going to say." "You were going to say that this is already worse than I told you it was in the hotel." She looked at the back of his head. "Is it?" The pause was half a second too long. "Yes," he said. The building on the north side had a loading bay entrance that opened into a freight elevator that opened into 3 floors of what had been, at some point, a textile storage facility and was now something considerably more complicated. The man with the weathered face, she eventually heard Damien call him Rourke, disappeared up a separate staircase with a phone already at his ear. Damien showed her a room, clean, 2 beds, a bathroom, a window that looked at brick. "I'll need to talk to you," he said, "once she's settled." "Give me 10 minutes." He nodded and left. Lila stood in the center of the room with her drawings and her bag and looked around at the brick walls and the industrial ceiling and said, "This is different." "It's an adventure," Nora said. "You don't like adventures," Lila said. "You always say adventures are what happens when plans fall apart." "I know. I said that." Nora sat on the edge of the bed and pulled her daughter in close and held her for a moment. Just a moment, not long enough to alarm her, just long enough to confirm the physical reality of her, solid and warm and here. "This is a plan falling apart a little. We're handling it." "Is it the man from the lobby?" "What?" "Is it because of the man from the lobby? He was there when you called and said we were going on a trip." Lila pulled back and looked at her. "Is he in trouble?" There were 100 things Nora could have said. She looked at her daughter's face and said, "We're going to figure it out together, okay?" "Okay." Lila accepted this with the particular trust that Nora knew she would spend years trying to deserve. "Can I keep the light on?" "Whatever you need." She waited until Lila's breathing had deepened and slowed. Then she went out and found Damien in the room across the hall, which had a table and 2 chairs and a lamp with a very yellow light, and she sat down across from him and put the drive on the table between them. He looked at it. "I found it 3 years ago," she said. "A corporate event. Wrong delivery, a confused transfer point, documents that passed through my hands for about 40 minutes before I understood I shouldn't give them back to the people who were asking for them." She looked at the drive. "I've looked at what's on it. I know what it is generally, but I don't have the access to know what it means specifically." Damien was very still. "Where did the delivery originate?" he said. "A company called Ardent Meridian Capital Partners." She watched his face. "Which I know now is one of the firms attending your summit." Something moved across his expression that she couldn't read. "Show me," he said. Rourke had a laptop. It took 12 minutes to access the drive's contents, and another 20 for Damien to go through enough of them to understand what he was looking at. He didn't speak during this time. He sat with his elbows on the table and his eyes moving across the screen and his jaw getting tighter by degrees that were almost measurable. She watched him. She'd looked at the documents enough to understand the shape of them. Financial transfers, layered through 6 jurisdictions, names that appeared and disappeared through a system of corporate shells that would have been opaque to most people and was only partially transparent to her because she'd spent the years since finding the drive doing quiet, careful reading about things she'd never had reason to understand before. One name appeared more than the others. "Vincent's been running money through the Summit investors," Damien said finally, "for at least 4 years. He clicked through something. He's been using my name, my accounts. Entities I set up before I disappeared that he's been operating in my absence." He looked up. "If federal financial investigators have been following this money, and this is the kind of trail they follow, Nora, this is exactly the kind of trail that ends in RICO charges. Every transaction traces back to me." The room was very quiet. "You've been legally dead," she said, "for 8 years, which means legally I've also been doing nothing for 8 years. The moment I resurface..." He stopped, closed the laptop. "Every move Vincent made in my name becomes my liability." "He set you up," Nora said, "not just 8 years ago. He's been setting you up continuously, so that if you ever came back, I walk into a federal case built on my own name and my own accounts, with 8 years of transactions I never made." His voice had gone flat. The flat of something beyond anger. "It's clean. It's actually very clean." She thought about the summit, about the investors in the Harrington Grand that afternoon, the carefully arranged tables, the welcome packets she'd assembled, the names on the badge sheets, about the fact that Damien had come to Harbor City to negotiate alliances with the exact financial entities Vincent had been funneling money through. "The summit," she said. He looked at her. "You came to negotiate with them," she said slowly. "You thought they were independent parties, new alliances, clean money." She felt it clicking into place with the horrible precision of something that had been designed to click into place. "But they're already Vincent's. They've been his for years. You were walking into a room full of people who are already on the other side of this." Damien was silent for 5 seconds. "The summit was Vincent's idea," he said. "He suggested Harbor City. He suggested this specific group of investors. He said it the way people said things they should have seen earlier, when they were alone with the knowledge of not having seen it. He told me it was the cleanest entry back into legitimate operations." "He invited you home," Nora said, "so he could control the room when you got here. And now he knows I found you." He stood up. The chair scraped back and he moved to the wall and stood with his back to her for a moment, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the deliberate process of containing something. He didn't know about Lila when he set this up, but he knows now, which means the plan has... He turned around. "He'll want to close this out before I can use her existence as leverage within the organization." "She's not leverage. She's a child. To you, to me." His voice cracked slightly on me, and he controlled it. "To Vincent, she's a liability with a name that supersedes his claim. She's the reason the organization's captains would follow me instead of him the moment they knew she existed." He moved back to the table. "He cannot afford her to be alive." The sentence landed in the yellow-lit room and stayed there. Nora put both hands flat on the table. She looked at them. Her own hands, the hands she'd used to build 7 years of ordinary, careful life. And she looked at them and let herself understand, fully and without the protective distance she'd been maintaining since the parking garage, what was actually happening. "I have to call someone," she said. "Nora, I have a contact, a federal contact." She looked up. "I've had one for 2 years since I found the drive and figured out I was holding something I couldn't just put back." Damien went very still. "You've been in contact with federal investigators," he said. "Not actively. A contact. Someone I found through a careful chain of introductions. Someone who gave me a number and told me to use it if I ever decided the drive was worth more than my safety margin." She held his gaze. "I've been deciding that for 2 years. If I bring in federal, Vincent's financial network gets exposed, and your name gets cleared before he can use the existing paper trail against you." She watched him process this. "The drive has 4 years of his transactions, 4 years of him moving money under your identity. If I hand that over with a full account of the chain of custody, it documents what he did, not what you did. You'd have to explain how you got it." "I know." "And testify to the chain of custody, which puts your name in federal proceedings, which..." "I know," she said again. "I've known that since I understood what I was holding. I've been deciding whether it was worth it." She paused. "Now I'm decided." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted. Not relief, not gratitude, something more complicated than either, something that knew what she was offering and understood the cost of it. "You'd do that," he said. "I'd do that for Lila," she said. "Not for you. Don't mistake the order of operations." A silence. "Understood," he said quietly. She picked up her phone. She went to the number she'd stored under a name that meant nothing, a random string of letters she'd chosen specifically because it would mean nothing to anyone else. She'd stared at it 100 times in 2 years. She'd come close to calling it 4 separate times. She pressed call. It rang twice. A voice she recognized, careful, measured, the voice of someone who made their living being neither warm nor cold. "This is a surprise." "I have the Ardent Meridian files," Nora said. So all of them. 4 years of transactions, chain of custody documented, originating source traceable." She paused. "I also have a witness who can identify the principal behind the shell structures." A pause on the other end. "When can you come in?" "I can't come in. Not yet. I need 24 hours and I need something from you first." She kept her voice level. "There's a man named Victor Crane. He currently has surveillance on my former address. I need to know if his operation is already on your radar, because if it is, I need to know what kind of play you're willing to make." Another pause. Longer. "Ms. Ashcroft." The voice was careful. "Victor Crane has been a confidential informant for this office for approximately 16 months. The room did something. The walls stayed where they were. The yellow lamp stayed on. Nora's hand tightened on the phone, and she felt the information arrive in her body before her mind had fully processed it. "Say that again," she said. "Victor Crane has been cooperating with federal investigators since..." "I heard you. She looked across the table at Damien. He was reading her face. Who authorized his cooperation agreement? That's not information I can... Who authorized it? The pause was a fraction too long. The cooperation was structured through a third-party legal arrangement. The authorizing contact was... The voice stopped. She could hear something shift on the other end. The very slight sound of someone making a decision about how much to say. Ms. Ashcroft, I think we need to have this conversation in person. Tell me the name, she said. The contact who structured Crane's agreement presented credentials as an attorney for a private security firm. Another pause. The firm's name is Ardent Meridian Capital Partners. Nora closed her eyes. Vincent had a man inside the federal investigation, not just surveillance on her building, not just financial architecture designed to trap Damien. He had someone inside the proceeding that was supposed to expose him, which meant that the moment she'd placed this call, Crane's phone had likely received a notification, which meant the location of that notification. She dropped the phone and was on her feet before she'd made the decision to stand. We have to move, she said, right now. Damien was already up. What happened? Crane is theirs. He's been feeding Vincent's people information about the federal investigation for 16 months, which means he knows exactly what's on that drive. Damien moved to the door. And he knows you have it. He pulled it open and called down the hall. Rourke, we're moving. 2 minutes. Nora went to Lila's room, pushed open the door. Her daughter was asleep. She crossed the room in 4 steps and put her hand on Lila's shoulder. And Lila's eyes opened, and this time the waking was different. Her daughter saw her mother's face in the harsh light from the hall and sat up without being told, already reaching for her shoes. We're moving again? Lila said. We're moving again. Nora took her daughter's hand. You're doing great. I know, Lila said. Matter of fact. And it almost broke Nora's heart, that matter-of-fact knowledge, the confidence of a child who had decided that her mother's saying we're okay was sufficient evidence that they were okay, even when everything visible suggested otherwise. They were in the freight elevator when Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face did something she hadn't seen it do before, a stillness that was different from his usual stillness, deeper. The stillness of someone seeing a name they didn't expect. He answered it. He didn't say anything. He just listened. 30 seconds, maybe 40. Lila watched him with her drawings pressed against her chest. Rourke watched the elevator floor indicator. Nora watched Damien's face. He ended the call. That was Vincent, he said. The elevator opened onto the loading bay. Cold air came in from somewhere. He knows we're in this building, Damien said. His voice had the flat quality again. The beyond anger flat. He wants to meet, tonight, the Meridian Summit. He says the investors have called an emergency session and they're expecting me to attend. He looked at Nora. He also says... He stopped. Say it, she said. He says if I don't come alone, the people he has watching the Harrington will release information to Harbor City PD about a 7-year-old girl whose birth certificate lists a deceased man as the father, which creates a legal custody question he'd be happy to let the court sort out. His jaw set. He doesn't know where we are. He's guessing I'm still at the hotel, but he... Another stop. Something in his voice went rough and dangerous. He used her name, Nora. He used Lila's name. The loading bay was cold, the bare concrete floor, the freight doors, the sound of the city outside at this hour muffled and distant. Lila looked up at her mother. Why did he say my name? Nora crouched down to her daughter's level. She looked at her face, this face that was somehow both hers and not hers, this face that had been the reason she'd gotten up every morning for 7 years when there was no other reason good enough. She thought about the drive in her pocket, about the federal contact whose line was now likely monitored, about Crane's people and Vincent's people, and the walls of a situation that had been closing for 8 years, tightening slowly and then all at once, the way things did. She thought about the kind of person she had been before Lila, the kind of person who would have found a way to disappear, to go quiet, to make herself small enough to slip through the gap. She was not that person anymore. She stood up. I need a car, she said to Rourke. Nora, Damien started. Not for leaving, she said. She looked at him. I need a car, and I need access to everything on that drive printed out and organized, and I need the name of someone in the federal system who is not connected to Crane's cooperation agreement. She pulled the drive from her pocket and set it on the hood of the nearest vehicle. Because I'm not going to let Vincent use my daughter's name as a bargaining chip, and I'm not going to let you walk into that summit meeting alone. She paused. And I am done being the person in this situation who has been careful. Damien looked at her for a long moment. You have someone, he said. Another contact. I have documents, she said, and I have been building a case by myself, quietly, for 3 years because I didn't know if I could trust anyone with what I knew. She met his eyes and held them. I'm deciding now who I trust. A silence. The summit is at 8 a.m., he said. Then we have 6 hours. He reached past her and picked up the drive. And in the freight bay of a North Side warehouse at 3 in the morning, with Lila sitting on a crate behind them drawing the wrong shade of green on another piece of harbor water, the two of them bent over Rourke's laptop and began to take apart 8 years of carefully constructed. They worked through the night. Rourke had a printer somewhere in the building, an old commercial unit that sounded like it was processing each page through physical suffering. And for 2 hours, Nora sat at the table in the freight bay's side office and organized the drive's contents into something that could be understood by someone who hadn't spent 3 years living adjacent to it. She made 3 stacks: financial transfers, corporate shell documentation, personnel records that shouldn't have existed in the same file as the others but did, which was its own kind of evidence about how confident Vincent had been that no one would ever see this. Damien worked the phone. She heard pieces of it, names she didn't recognize, clipped half-sentences, the particular cadence of a man calling in obligations that had been accruing for years. Some calls lasted 40 seconds. One lasted 11 minutes, and she heard his voice go low and specific in a way that made Rourke move to the far side of the room and look at the wall. At 5 a.m., Lila fell asleep on a folded tarp in the corner with her drawings tucked under her cheek. Nora looked at her daughter for a moment and felt the exhaustion hit her properly for the first time. Not the functional exhaustion she'd been running on, but the deep kind. The kind that lived in the back of the eyes and the base of the skull. She pressed her fingertips into her eye sockets and breathed through it and went back to the documents. At 6:15, Damien came and sat across from her and put a phone on the table. Richard Cass, he said. Federal prosecutor, Southern District. He's not connected to Crane's agreement. He's been building a parallel case on Vincent's financial network for 14 months without knowing Crane existed. He paused. He's willing to talk. This morning, before the summit. How did you get to him? I have a lawyer who's been in federal practice for 20 years. She found the gap. He looked at the stacks of paper. Cass has enough to charge Vincent on financial crimes. With what's on that drive, he has enough to take down the entire network. He paused. Including everything done under my name. He'll clear you. He'll consider clearing me. He held her gaze. There's a difference. I'm not asking you to trust that it ends clean for me. I'm asking you to trust that it ends. Nora looked at the third stack, the personnel records. She'd been coming back to them all night, to one page specifically. A security assignment dated 8 years ago and 4 months. Crane's name. A vehicle. A route from Harbor City to an airfield on the eastern edge of the state. And beneath it, in the clipped language of operational documentation, a passenger. Not Damien. A woman. Initials only. A.M. Who is A.M.? She said. Damien looked at the page. Something in his face shifted. Anna Moretti, he said. Vincent's daughter. She waited. She was 19. She'd been helping me pull records from the organization's accounting for 3 months, but she didn't agree with how her father ran things. He said it quietly. When the hit happened and I went to Gdansk, Vincent told me she'd been moved out of the city for her safety. I believed that too. He looked at the route on the page. That airfield doesn't have commercial traffic. It's private. It has one outgoing charter on that date. He stopped. And then it doesn't have Anna Moretti. Anywhere. For 8 years. The freight bay was silent except for the city coming through the walls. He killed his own daughter, Nora said, because she was helping me. His voice was without effect. The kind of flat that came from having sat with a piece of knowledge until it stopped having the power to move you and started having a different kind of power. He killed her and told me she was safe, and He stopped. I grieved her privately and kept his secret and let him run my organization for 8 years. Nora put the page in the first stack, with the financial transfers. Because that was what it was, evidence. It needed to be evidence now, not a story. She needed it to be documents and not horror, because if she let it be horror, she wouldn't be able to keep moving. Cass needs this page, she said. Cass needs all of it. Then let's go. The meeting with Richard Cass happened in a law office on the 42nd floor of a building on the financial district's edge at 7 a.m., with the city spread out below them in the early gray light. Cass was younger than Nora expected, mid-40s, compact, with the particular quality of stillness she'd come to associate with men who spent their professional lives managing information that could hurt people. He had 2 colleagues with him. He had documents of his own. He looked at Damien for a long time when they walked in. "You've been dead," Cass said. "Apparently not," Damien said. "This creates complications." "I'm aware." Cass looked at Nora. "And you're the event coordinator who's had this drive for 3 years." "Yes." "You should have come to us sooner." "I didn't know if you were safe to come to," she said, "given that Vincent Moretti apparently had a cooperation agreement structured through one of your informants." Cass's expression didn't change. He picked up the page she'd put on the table, the one about Anna Moretti, and read it and set it down and looked at his colleagues and said nothing for a moment. "The summit at the Harrington starts at 8, Damien said. "Vincent will be in the building. The investors connected to his financial network will be in the building. Every party to the last 4 years of transactions will be in one room." He paused. "That doesn't happen twice." "What are you proposing?" Cass said. "I'm proposing I walk into that summit and give you the room." A silence. "You'd be wearing a wire." "I'd be wearing whatever you need me to wear. And if Vincent decides the meeting is over before you get what we need..." "He won't." Damien's voice was flat. "He invited me here to finish this cleanly. He wants me to sign off on the financial agreements, which will put my living signature on 4 years of his transactions and complete the setup. He needs me cooperative and in that room." A pause. "He doesn't know what we've been doing since 3 a.m. Cass looked at the stacks of documents. He picked up one page, then another. He was reading fast, the fast of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at and was confirming rather than discovering. "Ms. Ashcroft," he said without looking up. "Your daughter, where is she?" "Safe," Nora said. "She doesn't go anywhere near the Harrington." "Agreed." He set the pages down. He looked at Damien. "I need 20 minutes to make calls. You don't leave this building." He looked at Nora. "Either of you." He walked out. His colleagues followed. Damien moved to the window. Harbor City spread below them. The harbor itself visible at the southern edge, the bridge, the morning light starting to flatten the night out of the sky. Nora came and stood beside him, and they looked at it without speaking for a moment. "She drew it wrong," Nora said. He looked at her. "Lila, the harbor picture, the water's the wrong color." She looked at the actual water, the real gray-green of it in the early light. "She'll want to fix it when she sees this." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated and more real. "Yeah," he said. She looked back at the window. "You understand that whatever happens in that room today doesn't automatically resolve everything else." "I know." "You can't walk out of a summit meeting with a wire and a federal prosecutor and expect Lila to..." She stopped, found the right words. "She doesn't know you. That takes time. Whatever you want from this, I want her to be safe," he said. "That's the first thing. Everything else comes after and takes however long it takes." He paused. "I understand that." Nora nodded once. They waited for Cass. At 7:43 a.m., Nora walked back into the Harrington Grand. She walked in alone, through the employee entrance on the building's east side, because she had a summit to run, and walking through the main entrance of a hotel where Vincent Moretti's people might be watching required her to look exactly like what she was, an event coordinator, arriving slightly late, moving with purpose. The lobby was set for the morning session. Her team had run the setup without her. Marcus had texted at 6 a.m. to say everything was in place, and did she need anything? And she'd responded that she was running slightly behind and would be there for the opening. He hadn't asked questions. He never asked questions in the right tone of voice. She moved through the lobby and checked the room arrangements and spoke to 3 different people about 3 different operational details, and none of it was performance. She genuinely needed to know if the South Conference Room's AV was functioning and whether the catering delay from last night had been resolved. She needed to be useful. She needed her hands to be doing something that was not shaking. At 7:58, Damien walked in through the main entrance. She saw him from across the room. He'd changed. Jacket, no tie, the same deliberate absence that read not as informality, but as a man who had decided that ties were for people who needed to signal something, and he did not need to signal anything. Cass's team had been 40 minutes. The wire was somewhere on him that she couldn't see and deliberately hadn't looked at. 2 of his own men came with him. Not Rourke. Others, faces she didn't know, chosen for this morning specifically. He crossed the lobby without looking at her. She went the other direction and took the position she always took at the start of a summit session, near the south wall, clear sight lines to the room, earpiece in, clipboard up. At 8:04, Vincent Moretti walked in. She'd built a picture of him from documents and from what Damien had told her, and from the particular way his name had appeared and disappeared through 8 years of Nora's peripheral awareness of a world she'd been adjacent to. The picture hadn't been wrong exactly. It just hadn't been enough. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired in a way that was almost architectural, deliberate, maintained, chosen. He was not a large man, but he occupied space the way certain people did, the kind of occupation that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with a long history of being the most dangerous person in any given room. He moved slowly. He moved like someone who had never needed to hurry because things had always waited for him. He saw Damien and stopped. Not in surprise, in assessment. The brief, fine-tuned recalibration of a man reading a situation and deciding what it meant. Then he smiled. Nora watched the smile from across the room and felt something cold move through her chest. "Damien," Vincent said, his voice carried without effort. Warm, entirely warm. "You look well." "Vincent," Damien's voice was level. "Good summit so far." "Better now." Vincent moved toward him, and they met in the center of the lobby floor, and the thing that happened between them, the handshake, the shoulder clasp, looked from across the room exactly like a reunion between 2 men who trusted each other. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "You left me very little choice." "I left you every choice." Vincent's smile didn't move. "That's always been my style." He looked around the room. "Shall we go in? The investors are assembled." "After you." The conference room filled. Nora moved to her station outside the south door, where the PA system controls were, where she could hear through the door without being in the room. Cass's people were in 4 positions she'd been told about and had not looked for directly because looking would have looked like something. At 8:17, the summit session began. She listened through the door for 11 minutes while the opening proceedings ran. The agenda, the formal introductions, the financial framework being presented by a man whose name she recognized from the documents as one of the 4 primary shells. She listened and breathed and kept her face arranged into the professional neutrality of a woman whose job was the room and not what was happening in it. At 8:28, she heard Damien's voice say, "Before we proceed to the agreement phase, I'd like to table a clarification." A pause. "Of course." Vincent's voice, still warm, controlled. "The corporate entities listed in the framework documents, Ardent Meridian, Caspar Holdings, the Velt Group." Damien's voice was conversational, almost. Almost. "I'd like to confirm that each of these has operated independently for the period specified." A silence that was a fraction too long. "Standard confirmation," Vincent said. "Of course." "Because I have documentation suggesting that the operational independence of these entities has been compromised over an extended period." A pause. Significantly extended. The silence this time was different. She could feel the temperature of it through the door. "Damien." Vincent's voice had not changed. That was the terrifying part. It had not changed at all. I think we should table this particular discussion for a more private setting. I think we're in the right setting. Damien's voice was flat now, the flat she knew. Given that the people in this room are the people who should hear it. A chair moved. She heard it. The specific scrape of someone standing up abruptly. Then she heard three things at once. A door she hadn't been watching open behind her, someone saying her name in a voice she didn't recognize, and from inside the conference room, a sound that was not a voice. She turned. Victor Crane was standing in the corridor, not the surveillance version, not the man in a car 60 feet from her building. Here, inside, 15 feet away, with two men behind him and the particular stillness of someone who had already decided how this was going to go. "Ms. Ashcroft," he said, "Mr. Moretti would like you to step away from the door." "I'm running this event," she said. "You're done running this event." He moved toward her, not fast. He didn't need to be fast. "The drive. I need it." "I don't have it." "You had it 3 hours ago." "And 3 hours ago I handed it to a federal prosecutor." She watched his face. "Richard Cass, Southern District. He's been building a case on Vincent's financial network for 14 months, as I suspect you know, given that you've been feeding information about that case back to Vincent for 16 months. She watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. "Which creates a situation for you, Mr. Crane, because the cooperation agreement you have with the federal investigation is now the center of a separate inquiry, and the man you've been protecting is in a room 30 feet away about to become the subject of an arrest." Crane's face did something. Not breakdown. Men like him didn't break down, but a recalibration. The specific expression of someone whose plan has hit a structural problem they can't immediately solve. "Step away from the door," he said again, quieter. "No," she said. Inside the conference room, voices were rising. She heard Damien's, still controlled but no longer conversational. She heard another voice she didn't recognize. She heard Vincent say something in a tone that was no longer warm. Crane moved. She stepped back and hit the PA panel with her elbow, and the system kicked on. Every speaker in the south wing of the Harrington Grand's conference floor suddenly live, suddenly broadcasting whatever was happening in that room, and she grabbed the edge of the panel to keep her balance as Crane's hand closed on her arm, and she yanked away and put the PA cart between them. From the speakers, Damien's voice filled the corridor. "I want everyone in this room to understand what's been done in my name. 4 years of transactions, 47 shell companies, and one personnel file from 8 years ago that documents the murder of Anna Moretti, who was 19 years old and made the mistake of trying to help me." The corridor went completely still. Crane stood 6 feet away with his hand still extended, and his face doing something that was, for the first time since she'd seen him, not controlled. From inside the room, silence. Then Vincent's voice. And now it had changed. Now the warmth was gone. Now there was something underneath it that had always been underneath it, that had been underneath it for 40 years of running a room and deciding who left it. Said, "Shut it down." Crane looked at the speakers, then at Nora, then at the 4 people in federal credentials who came through the stairwell doors at the end of the corridor. "Victor Crane," one of them said, "step back from Ms. Ashcroft." Crane went still. Inside the conference room, the sound of chairs. Multiple chairs. Multiple people. The shuffle and scrape of a room breaking apart. A voice she didn't know saying, "Nobody move." Then another voice, closer to the door. "Damien, get away from him." Then the door opened. Damien came through it moving fast, and she had 1 second to register that he was upright and unharmed before he was past her, and she turned to follow the direction of his movement and saw that Vincent Moretti had not gone with the others. Vincent had gone the other way. Through the secondary corridor, the one that led to the hotel's service routes, the one that Nora knew and most people didn't. "He's going for the loading dock," she said. Damien was already running. She ran. She knew this building in a way that 8 years of events had put into her body. She knew where the service corridor turned and where it opened and where the loading dock's 2 exits were. She took the shorter route, through the kitchen passage, past startled catering staff, through the fire door that opened onto the loading area where trucks came and went with the invisible logistics of a working hotel. She came out ahead of him. Vincent was crossing the dock when he saw her. He stopped. 30 feet between them. The dock was half lit, the morning light coming in from the open bay doors, the smell of exhaust and the sound of the city. He looked at her. He took her in. The clipboard she'd dropped somewhere, the earpiece still in, the nothing left to lose quality she suspected was visible on her face. "You're the coordinator," he said. "I'm the mother," she said. Something moved across his face. Not remorse, recalculation again. The endless recalculation of a man for whom everyone and everything was a variable to be managed. "You understand what you've done," he said. It wasn't accusatory. It was almost curious. "You've pulled down a structure that's been standing for 40 years. "Good," she said. He took a step toward the far bay door. Damien came through the kitchen fire door behind her. Vincent stopped. For a moment, 3 seconds, maybe 4, the three of them existed in that loading dock in a specific geometry that felt, to Nora, like the concentrated weight of 8 years pressing into a single physical space. The man who had erased Damien's life. The man who had survived it. And her, standing between them, which was not where she'd planned to be and was exactly where she was. "It's done, Vincent," Damien said. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. "Nothing is ever done," Vincent said. "You know that." "Not this time." Vincent looked at him for a long moment. Then something in him shifted. The calculation completing, the outcome becoming clear. He looked at Nora. "The child," he said, almost to himself. "She ruined this." "She didn't ruin anything," Nora said. "She drew a picture." He moved for the bay door. What happened next was fast. The specific compressed speed of a man who had spent 40 years being faster than the consequences of his choices. He reached the door. He hit the exterior with his shoulder. He made it 4 steps onto the exterior ramp before Damien's men, who had been at the perimeter since before the summit started, because Damien had learned in 8 years to prepare for the version of events where everything went wrong simultaneously. Vincent Moretti hit the ground with federal agents on 3 sides of him, and the Harbor City morning opening up around the loading dock, gray and cold and indifferent. He didn't struggle. He lay on the ramp with his hands being secured and his face against the concrete and his eyes still open, still calculating, still somewhere behind them doing the math on variables that no longer mattered. And Nora stood in the bay door and watched it and felt nothing at first. Then something, not triumph. Something more structural than triumph. The feeling of a weight that had been distributed across years of her life, lifting from a specific point she hadn't known, was load-bearing until it suddenly wasn't anymore. Damien came and stood beside her. They watched the federal team work the dock, voices on radios, the efficient, impersonal machinery of an arrest in progress. Somewhere above them, in the conference rooms of the Harrington Grand, the same machinery was moving through a different space, gathering different people, and the financial architecture that Vincent had built over 4 decades was beginning the process of. The concrete ramp smelled like exhaust and wet asphalt, and the particular cold of a Harbor City morning that had decided not to commit to anything yet. Not rain, not sun, just gray and waiting. Nora stood in the bay door until the federal vehicles had pulled out of the loading area, until the last radio voice had faded down the exterior corridor, until the dock was quiet except for the city's background noise, which never fully stopped, which was one of the things she'd come to find reliable about Harbor City in the years she'd spent rebuilding inside it. Damien was still beside her. He hadn't moved since Vincent went down on the ramp. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and his eyes on the empty concrete where it had happened, and she could see, in profile, the specific quality of what was on his face, not relief, not satisfaction. Something more complicated. The expression of a man who had spent 8 years building toward a moment and was now standing in the aftermath of it and finding that aftermath looked different from the inside than it had from a distance. She understood that. She'd had her own version of it, standing in a parking garage holding a crayon drawing. "Rourke has Lila," she said. "I know." He'd checked his phone 17 minutes ago and again 6 minutes ago. She'd seen him do it both times. She's going to want breakfast. Yeah. She turned and walked back through the fire door into the kitchen corridor, and after a moment she heard his footsteps behind her. The kitchen was settling back into its regular morning rhythm. The catering staff who'd watched two people run through at speed were now moving with the focused, slightly elevated energy of people who had processed something unusual and were choosing to focus on work instead. Nobody stopped them. Nobody asked anything. In the lobby, it looked different now. Quieter. The federal presence that had swept through the conference level was leaving its traces. A badge station abandoned mid-use, two chairs at wrong angles, a water pitcher on its side on a table that no one had yet righted. The summit had dissolved in a way that left its structural evidence scattered across the room like the aftermath of weather. Marcus met her at the corridor entrance. He looked at her face. He looked at Damien, who had come through behind her. He looked at the room. "Do I want to know?" he said. "Not yet," she said. "Can you close the South Conference floor for the rest of the morning and manage the guests?" Already started. He had his clipboard. Of course he had his clipboard. She felt a sudden fierce gratitude for Marcus, for the 12 years of competence he carried so quietly. "The Callaway Group is asking questions. Tell them the session has been postponed due to a regulatory consultation. Don't elaborate." "Understood." He glanced at Damien once more, made a decision not to address it, and went. She sat down on one of the lobby chairs. Not a graceful descent, more of a controlled collapse, the body finally demanding acknowledgement of the last 6 hours. She set her elbows on her knees and pressed her palms against her face and breathed into the darkness of her own hands for a moment. The chair beside her moved, weight settling into it. She lowered her hands. Damien was sitting with his elbows on his knees in almost the same posture, looking at the overturned water pitcher on the table across from them. It was still on its side. A thin line of water had traced itself across the tablecloth. "Cass will need full statements," he said. "I know. Today, probably. While the timeline is fresh." "I know, Damien." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. I'm defaulting to logistics because logistics is easier than the rest of it." She looked at the water pitcher too. "I know that move. I invented that move." A silence that was, for the first time since the parking garage, not pressurized. "Is it done?" she said. "Actually done. Not logistics done. Done." He thought about it, which she respected. He didn't reach for easy reassurance. The financial network is documented and in federal hands. Crane is in custody. Vincent is in custody. The cooperation agreement Crane had is going to unwind, which means the parallel investigation Cass has been running is going to absorb it. He paused. "There will be proceedings. It'll take time. There are parts of the organization's structure that are going to take months to fully collapse." He looked at her. "But the part that had someone watching your building last night? That part is done." She nodded. "And you," she said. "What happens to you?" He looked back at the table. "Cass's position is that the documentation on the drive establishes that the transactions under my name were unauthorized and executed during a period of documented incapacitation." He said it like he was reading from something, like the legal language was a layer he could keep between himself and what it meant. "The cooperation today helps. My attorney has been in contact with his office since 6 a.m. A pause. "I'm not going to walk away clean. There will be conditions, oversight. Some of what existed before, he stopped. Some of it has to go, formally, legally surrendered and documented. The organization. Whatever legitimate parts remain after the proceedings. Yes." His jaw set. "I've been planning that anyway, since before I came back to Harbor City." He looked at her. "I didn't come back to rebuild the empire. I came back to dismantle it carefully enough that it didn't take anyone innocent down with it." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's either the truth or the best constructed version of what you want me to hear," she said. "I know." He held her gaze. "You'll have to decide which." She looked away. At the lobby's morning light, at the righted water pitcher that someone, Marcus probably, had quietly set back upright while they were talking. "I need to get Lila," she said. "I'll drive you. I know where Rourke is." "I know you know." He paused. "I'd like to drive you." She stood up. She picked up nothing. She'd left the clipboard somewhere in the kitchen corridor, and the earpiece was still in her ear, dead battery, serving no function. She reached up and took it out and set it on the table. "Okay," she said. Lila had eaten breakfast. This was the first thing she reported when Nora came through the door of the North Side building with the specificity of a child for whom meals were a reliable structuring principle of any situation. "Rourke made eggs," she said. "They were okay. He put too much pepper." "Noted," Nora said, and pulled her daughter in and held her for a moment with her eyes closed and her hand on the back of Lila's head and the solid, warm, entirely alive reality of her pressed against her chest. Lila let this happen for approximately 4 seconds before pulling back with the dignity of someone who had been very patient and was now ready for explanations. "Are we still in trouble?" she said. "No," Nora said. "We're not in trouble anymore." Lila considered this. "Are we going home?" "Today, yeah." "Good." She picked up her drawings from the crate where she'd left them. "I want to fix the watercolor. The harbor water is wrong." She looked at the 3 drawings she'd selected at 2 in the morning in an apartment she'd been half asleep in. "Also, I left my blue crayon." "We'll get more blue." Lila nodded. Then she looked past Nora's shoulder at the door, where Damien had stopped in the entrance, one hand on the frame, reading the room before he came into it. Lila looked at him. He looked at her. The particular silence of 2 people who didn't yet have a language for each other. "You came back," Lila said. Damien looked at her with an expression that Nora, watching from the side, could only describe as someone standing very close to the edge of something and holding on. "Yeah," he said. "From the hotel?" "From the hotel." Lila looked at him for another moment with her father's eyes in her mother's face and her own particular brand of assessment that belonged to neither of them and had been hers since she was old enough to assess anything. "You can look at my